Hey, what's up everybody, Isaac here, coming to you with another New World video, and today we are continuing our How to Tank series, and we are going to do that by walking you through a Barnacles and Blackpowder expedition. It is going to be an M10 gold run, but the concepts inside the dungeon as far as taunting and holding aggro, they're going to be the same whether you're running a low level mutation or a regular dungeon. And first things first, I'd just like to say thank you for all the new subscribers and all the love on my recent videos. All the likes, all the subscribes, they do help. So let's jump right into it. And the dungeon we're running, it's in the southern part in Cutlass Keys, and it's currently a fire mutation. So we're going to cover the gear and the build first, and we'll run some timestamps, so if you want to skip all of this stuff, you can jump right into the run. But first things first, in all of our gear we are going to have rubies, which is going to give us 6% fire damage, and we got it on all of our gear, all of our jewelry. We don't have crazy good gear for this dungeon. This is actually the very first stuff I got when I first started lower level mutations, and I never upgraded it. So this stuff is possible even without completely bist out gear. So let's start with the helmet. And we're going to have Refreshing Ward, which is okay, but it's not crazy good. Crit Retribution, which does absolutely nothing for us. And Lost Ward, which is an absolute must. Strength, which is a good perk to have, or a good attribute to have. And our chest piece, once again, Strength, good attribute. Leeching Path of Destiny does no good for us since we are not running Hammer. And Lost Ward must have Luck, nice to have for drops, but doesn't help us from a performance standpoint. And our gloves, we have Dex Con. I would prefer Strength Con, but it is what it is. Lost Ward must have, Crippling Blast Shot does absolutely zero for us. And Luck, nice to have, but doesn't help us from a performance standpoint. And our pants, Constitution, good attribute to have. Lost Ward is a must-have. Invigorated, it's okay, it doesn't help us tons in this dungeon. The rend expiring faster would help us on the very last boss, but the problem is we have to switch gear to the Angry Earth set at the end of the dungeon, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. So our boots, we have Con Focus. Obviously the focus is terrible to have, but it's only 10, and it's the only piece that we have that has a completely dead attribute, so we'll get away with it. Refreshing, one of the better perks you can have in Lost Ward is a must-have. Luck doesn't help us anything from a performance standpoint. So these are decent boots, but they do have focus, which is very bad. And that's that. So we have our shield. This is one of our better pieces that we have, and as a tank, as you start moving up in the mutations, one thing you're going to want to start looking for, you're going to want to find a shield ward for the specific mutation. You can get away without having it. You could just find a shield that has Lost Ward, or it could just be a good 3-perker, and it is enough to get you through. That's how I've done the majority of my dungeons, but as I move along, I've been looking to improve my gear as we go. So having Flame Shield Ward for the flame mutations is going to make you a lot more tanky. And we got Sturdy, which is a great shield perk, and you take 9.5% less stamina damage. Obviously very important as a tank. Refreshing is a very good perk to have, but there are better perks to have on your shield specifically. And then we got Dexterity. I would prefer Con or Strength, but it is what it is. We make it work. And our amulet, this is another piece that as a tank, you're going to want to start working towards having. And I just recently got this. I haven't always had it, but we got the flame protection. So you're going to want to start working towards having a protection for each of the different types of mutations. So if it was a nature mutation, we would want nature protection, but it's a fire mutation, so we have flame protection. And then we have strength, good attribute. Empowered, which is nice to have, just help us to do a little bit more damage for longer, but not a must-have. And health is a very good perk on your amulet as well. So our ring, we have, I don't know why it wouldn't let me mouse over, but we'll just go put it right back on. But our ring has Constitution, Crippling, which isn't that great, but it's okay. Leeching is one of the perks I've love to have, and hardy. So these are two kind of must-have go-tos. You know, you can get away without them, but those are two really important perks to have, in my opinion. So the earring, definitely a few different earrings you can rock, and I upgraded this one from my first video. If you want to check out what I had in my first video, go ahead and check that out. But I upgraded. Refreshing Toast, I've always had that, but Nimble, I do like to have that faster stamina regen. Obviously that's when we're not blocking, so when we're attacking and doing whatever, walking around, the stamina is going to regen faster. Obviously doesn't count when we're blocking, but very good to have. And then Healthy Toast, we can drink a mana pot and gain extra health, 9.7% of our max health. So that means that we are running a mana pot on our bar instead of the hearty meal. And the other thing we're running is Lost Ward Potion for the lost portion of the dungeon. And there is an Angry Earth part to the dungeon where we will pop an infused Angry Earth Ward Potion into our bar as long as we remember to switch them out. So that covers our armor and jewelry. We'll show you our sword and shield. We'll show you our sword. We covered that before, but our hatchet we're using, we do not have a Lost Bane hatchet, unfortunately. But this is a decent hatchet to use in the meantime. For my build, I love to run Refreshing Torrent. It just makes you even better as a tank, but without it, you can still be extremely effective. So I do like Chain Lightning, well, not necessarily lightning, but just chain of any kind, because we do basic attacks and it triggers. And it hits many enemies at one time. Obviously it's helpful to do extra damage, but also we're the tank, so if we can do damage to multiple enemies, we can help to draw aggro from multiple enemies. So very good to have as a tank or as a DPS as well. Great perk for dungeons. And we'll go over our attributes. And unfortunately, since our attributes are kind of all over the place, we don't have the absolute best attribute tree, but it works out just fine. So since we have a bunch of dex on pieces, we're going to go with the dex build. That brings us to 150 dex, which allows us to use 10 less stamina whenever we dodge. So that's a nice bonus to hit. And then our constitution, we're going up to close to 250. The 250 bonus perk, it's not super important, but I like to be around 250 just because that gives us survivability if we get hit by any of the exploders. Ideally, we don't get hit by any exploders, and if we do, we have our hatchet and life save out, but just nice to have. I could definitely get away with running 200 con, but since we can't get to 300 strength anyways, which is what would be my preferred 200 con, 300 strength build, we're just gonna play it safe and go closer to the 250 mark. So that covers that. We'll go over the weapon build. We're just going full defender side for this video. And that's on the sword. And on the hatchet, we are doing this build. If you don't have Refreshing Torrent, refer back to my first video and check out the build I would use in that situation. But that covers the basics on all of the gear and our build for the run. So let's go ahead and get started and jump right in. So the first part, super basic. Just jump right into the middle of all of the mobs. Pop your taunt, turn around, and block with your shield. Try to get on the opposite side of your teammates, let them get as much back crits as you can. Then I just pull out my hatchet and start DPSing away just to help melt things a little faster. Definitely didn't need to waste my sword and shield taunt here, but I did. Not the end of the world. Ideally, it would have been better if I saved it because it wasn't needed, so I could have saved it for the next part up ahead. But really works out nicely because I'm able to show you one little concept here. So I taunt this first group. You don't have to taunt them, but it's just easier to make sure that your DPS don't steal aggro. And I don't have another taunt on cooldown at this part, so I just start going around and tagging everything, making sure if I do a little bit of damage to them, that means I'm going to get their aggro. So I just DPS away until I have my taunt back up, taunt everything, and then we're right back to DPSing. So at this point, we're pretty much able to just DPS away. There's nothing left that's really going to cause our team any problems. So focus on killing the mobs and move along to the next part. So this next part, I like to taunt the group backwards. There is one guy in the back that he can one-shot your light DPS or your healer. So I just like to taunt this first group back, and we let the DPS kill the squishies. For some reason our team got held up, not sure what was going on back there, but I just had to hold the aggro for a little bit longer. Anytime something like that happens, just make sure you survive. So I just like to taunt this first group back, we kill the squishies, and then we move on. And that shaman in the back, I think it is, you can see one of our DPS already jumped on it. Usually I would go and jump on it, but since we already have a DPS on it, I'm just going to help our team with the boss. And it gets to be pretty difficult to drag these two on top of each other because they are both range. So if one was melee and one was range, we would just go stack on the range and then would let the melee stack on us. But since they are both range, it's not exactly easy to get them to stack on top of each other. So we're not able to AoE them down, we gotta take them out both individually. Here, pull out my hatchet, taunt those exploders, and drag them forward. So you can see a couple of the DPS that came with me up front, and a couple stayed behind. But typically those exploders, they aren't going to make it past that little shrine. So see our DPS, we got one guy behind, so I just stay back, make sure I taunt the first group so he doesn't get aggro. This part is typically pretty simple, but people do sometimes get knocked to it. So as the tank, just kind of make sure you watch out for your group. Typically you should be the first one through, and then everyone kind of follows in your steps. Give things a taunt so that they focus on hitting you or shooting you. Let your teammates make it all the way through, and then finish the runoff. So this part, some people will do it inside the cages, some do it outside the cages. But either way works, whatever your group is comfortable with. This group wanted to do it outside the cages, so that's what I was happy to do. And we're just trying to taunt everything, trying to do damage. Biggest thing is, you know, some of these ranged guys, they can take out your healer or your DPS pretty handily, so try and make sure that you get their aggro. But the biggest thing, of course, is the healer. Healer goes down, you can find yourself in some trouble. Next part, this little boss alligator spawns in with a couple of these boomer bombs, and I just move up and I try to taunt them all, try to get all of their attentions. And unfortunately I did not have my AoE taunt off of cooldown, so I just go and do a little bit of damage, and I taunt one with my shield bash, drag them away from the crowd so the boomers don't go and explode on somebody and take someone out. Try to avoid as many knocks as we can. But then we're right back to the middle and DPSing away. You know, it gets pretty basic once you're down to just the big guy, the big alligator and the little alligators. Once the exploders are taken care of, this guy's pretty basic. So if you do heavy attack, it's going to drain his stamina faster, so it is helpful. But as a tank, I'm mainly just trying to hold his aggro so that I'm mainly going to get attacked. So as a tank, what you're going to want to do is you want your DPS to kill that group of squishies first. You know, go where they spawn in. But what I like to do is I like to go taunt them so I have their aggro first. So the first round of attacks, the DPS can have just free attacks on those mobs. They don't have to worry about them getting shot. But I will go and taunt the first group, and then I will come and taunt this little Master at Arms dude. So you can see, like, you know, everywhere else. We are trying to get heavy aggro on everything.
From the alligator. I'd go back and grab it.
You know, our job is to take as big of a beating as we can without dying, and the DPS's job is to kill things as fast as they can. The healer's job is to keep everyone alive. So that works best when you grab the aggro from everything and you let the DPS and heals do their specific jobs as well. So like I said, there are some people that will tell you, you know, kind of trolls that will tell you if you use a hatchet as a tank, you're trolling. But once people run with me, they kind of like it because, you know, they love when I have all the aggro and they can just do their job without too much worries. With the hatchet, you have such unreal taunts, you can keep pretty darn good aggro on everything. So there's the three mobs here. Some people will kill them one at a time, but anytime you can group them up and do as much AoE damage as you can, all the better. We are running an M10 mute, so if it's a regular dungeon, perhaps just kill them one at a time, but if it's a mutation, it is important to start saving time. So I like to come up here before the rest of my team and set off these exploders. Unfortunately, you know, the rest of the team, they got impatient and jumped in before the exploders were dead, so we got somebody knocked. So ideally, they wait until the exploders go off, but such is life, it's the way she goes. So at this point, we are just working on DPS and everything else down. There's nothing else to worry about. The main two things are the two bombers. Them are the things that are going to cause problems. Yeah, as you can see, they did take out one of our DPS here. But such is life. Just a knock, not a full thirst. They are actually going to get full killed here coming up on this Tentacle. But ideally, you go in first as the tank. You get their aggro and go on the opposite side as your DPS. And DPS did come and follow me for some reason, and he did end up getting full killed, but not the end of the world. It's our first respawn, and you can definitely get gold with a few respawns, but I do like to try and get the best score possible. So ideally, we're not getting too many respawns, but still makes for an easy gold run. So this group here, I like to just go in the middle and taunt everything and try to drag them away from our team. I like to just run down this right side, but I did see that, well, our healer is over where I usually like to run, so I'll stop short and, you know, see what I can do to not die, and it works just fine. We're able to avoid all the bombers, we have their aggro, we get them to blow up inside of the group. And one thing I like to do here is I like to throw hatchets at that ranger from a distance, because otherwise if you go right in, he's just gonna range you down, but he does cause lots of damage, so you gotta be careful of him. If you don't get on him right away, he can easily take out your healer or DPS, but when you're able to call him back by chucking a hatchet at him, you know, pulls him out of the room, let your DPS just take him out real fast. So this room is kind of filled with ranged mobs, so it can be pretty annoying. It can get, you know, kind of ugly, kind of spread out, but you can see we did still manage to get some decent groups going. So for this last part, I just like to taunt everything and then run it right through. Got the aggro on the bombers, so they're going to chase after me, and they're going to end up, you know, exploding on some of the mobs here. So I just like to taunt everything and carry it away from our DPS. You can see the exploders, they go off inside of all of the mobs, and they help us do some of the damage. You can see their health bars take a big chunk.
Let the exploders do the damage for you.
Yeah, just mentioning, talking to our team about how I like dragging the exploders into the group of the mobs and they explode and they do a bunch of DPS. So that's that much less DPS you gotta do to them. Yeah, those tentacles hit hard as heck. The one shot you like nothing if you're... So we are moving right along. I just like to top this top group and just drag them right down to these ranged guys. These ranged guys, they can cause some problems. They can one tap your light con players, but if you drag them down, you AoE them down, typically you got, hopefully you got a couple of DPS with some CC, so you just keep knocking them down, stunning them, and they can't hurt you when they're stunned or knocked down. So pretty basic part, but sometimes people will get knocked because those range guys, they can one hit people that are low con. So ideally what we do here is we get everything taunted, then we stack on the range guy. Because the range will not come to the melee, but the melee will come to the range. So, group it up, taunt it up, AoE it down, move on to the next part. Once again, I didn't manage my taunts perfectly. I don't have any taunts ready to go, but I hit that guy with weaken, then I come over here and do some damage to these guys. That way I have all of their aggro, and then my taunt comes off cooldown, so I give them a taunt as well. So that makes sure I have a really strong hold of aggro on all the mobs and on the boss guy as well. So you can see, even when your taunt isn't up, just by doing damage you can get the aggro of the mobs and the boss for that matter. So it's important to know how you can hold aggro even when you don't have a taunt available. So I just jump up here and I start shooting at the barrels with my hatchet. The healer is able to, if he gets in the right location, shoot the lever through the gap in the barrels, but just in case, I jump up and help the healer start breaking the barrels, just to move things along. You break the barrels and then you can just shoot the handle that opens up the bridge. So this boss is pretty basic. If you just put a hatchet on, that's all you need for this boss. Whether you're a tank or a DPS, you can get away with just a hatchet. So not bad, you know, if you got hammer, he is a little bit weaker to blunt damage, so not bad idea to have a hammer to do a little bit of extra damage as well, but I just pull out my hatchet and I hatchet away at him. So as long as you got a little bit of con, you can survive basically anything this boss has to throw at you with his big AoE attacks, especially if you're sitting inside of a heal. So when he starts dropping his big AoE attacks, basically the whole team, they're just gonna sit in the heal and hatchet away through it. Kind of the ideal way to do it. So when I can, I'm just constantly trying to pick up the cannonballs and load them into the cannons. Anytime you can do that as a tank, it's helpful. DPS can do it as well, but they are a little bit more squishy, so there's a better chance of them getting knocked when, you know, you're carrying a cannonball to the cannon, but you don't get there in time, so the line of fire knocks you down. Well, as a tank, that line of fire isn't going to be able to one-shot you. Hopefully it's not able to one-shot the DPS either, but it can take a huge chunk of damage out of them. But as a tank, you're going to be able to survive pretty nicely, even if you do have to just tank through one of those lines. But dodging through is pretty basic. You run right up to the line, and as you're just about to go through it, hit your dodge key. Dodge right through. Sometimes it feels a little bit goofy. It feels like the point you should dodge, it should be a little sooner than it is, but basically as you're going through it, you hit dodge and you're good to go. So sometimes this is when it starts getting a little bit tricky for the last half of it. His big AoE damage can sometimes start taking people out, but we had a healer with really strong heals, so basically he'd get in the heal and you're good to go when he drops his big AoE bombs. So when he spawns in the little ads, they're super squishy. I do throw a taunt at them when it's up, but it's really not that important because your DPS should be able to pretty much one-shot them. So if you got a taunt, go ahead and throw it on them, but for the most part, they're just all gonna get one-shot anyways. This part is where it gets a little bit trickier. When you got double lines and if you got squishier DPS, you're gonna have to eat a line a lot of times when you're going to feed the cannon for a cannonball. But we had a really strong healer and good DPS, so no problem keeping them alive even when they did have to face tank a line while they were bringing a cannonball to the cannons. So once again, we're just trying to find the heal, sitting in it, and we're just DPSing away at the boss. So really basic on that boss as the tank. Just pull out your hatchet, sit in the AoE heals and hatchet away. Dodge through the lines of cannonballs, and you're gonna be good to go. So what I like to do here is I like to call all three of these ghosts back to me. You know, you can go right into the middle, but when I can, I try to avoid that big slow thing circle getting stacked on everybody. It helps a little bit, especially when you got a squishy DPS. You can see when I got caught in it, even as a tank, you know, it chunked my health pretty heavy. So anytime you can get those circles to drop, but they're not on top of you where you're gonna gather the mobs together, it's very nice. So this part, we are going to kill all the ghosts. Sometimes people will skip on a few of them, but we're gonna taunt the first ghost, we're gonna drag them to the second ghost, we're gonna taunt the second group, and then we're just gonna AoE everything down. And the reason why we don't skip 2 ghosts here like some people do is we need the mob count, and that's gonna allow us to skip a few extra mobs at the end of the run that we wouldn't be able to skip if we skipped these 2 mobs. So once again, same thing here. If we have our taunt, we're gonna go in the middle of everything and we are going to taunt them. If our taunt for some reason is not up, we have mismanaged our taunts, well, then we're just gonna have to go and get a tag on every enemy and try to drag them into one circle and get them to attack us. Which sometimes it happens, you don't have a taunt, so you just have to go and do a little DPS. That's why I like having the throw on the hatchet. You don't necessarily have to run up to everything just to tag them. You can just sit back, throw your hatchet at each mob, and pull them to you. Get your aggro without having to run all over the place just by throwing a hatchet at them. So we get to this part and we actually do end up getting somebody knocked. So I like to stack on this range guy just because, well, the range, he isn't going to come to the melee, but the melee will come to the range. So that's why I stacked in here. If I would have moved all the way into the boss, you know, it would have been more predictable to the DPS, and I could have taunted everything, and he might not have gotten knocked. But anytime that you can, just to speed things up, you want to stack on the ranged guy, because he is not going to come to the melee, and anytime you can AoE everything down at one time, it's going to be the better. So that's just the reasoning for why I stayed where I did instead of going stack on the boss. Just to try and avoid having to come back and solo kill the ranged guy. But the way it worked out anyways, you know, we did end up stacking on the range.
Try to get boss ready here if you can.
So a lot of times on this part, the team's gonna just let you do this. You know, obviously it's possible
we
for the
don't go back
DPS
across
to,
the
but
bridge.
sometimes if they are squishy, they can die to this. You know, if you got a strong healer, they can out heal pretty much any of that. But if you do get hit by the lightning, it takes that thing away and you have to redo it. But we are putting on our Angry Earth set, and I don't have a crazy strong Angry Earth set. It's just all Dex and all Angry Earth Ward. I do have one piece. You can see the gold leggings. They do have one perk, I think, Accelerated Resolve for my sword and shield. But other than that, it's just basic gear. With Angry Earth Ward, it does have blight resistance, but that doesn't help us in this dungeon. So I like to get all set up before we move along. We do have a couple of ghosts that are still going to be Lost Bane, but if we get set up here, that makes us ready to run past the tentacles without getting hurt quite as bad. So I like to get boss ready here.
Yeah, we can kill these first.
And I didn't cover my Angry Earth set at the beginning of the video, but like I said, it's pretty basic. It's full Dex and full Angry Earth Ward, and all 5 pieces have blight resistance. I do like to stack these 2 ghosts. You can see I pulled out my hatchet, I threw it at the far ghost so we can AoE them both down at the same time. But yeah, back to the Angry Earth Ward set. It's full 5-piece Angry Earth Ward, full 5-piece blight resistance, which is nice in Genesis but doesn't help us in here. 1 piece with Accelerated Resolve, so we got 1 bonus perk, but other than that, it's the most basic ward set you can have. So as we run through here, you know, we are at a mob count that we can afford to skip these mobs, so I try to get their aggro by attacking them or by taunting them. That way our DPS and healer can run through without taking damage, and you know, they can also gather the nodes without worry. But this is the second to last mob we have to kill. Then we do have to kill 1 more tentacle, and you are going to have to make sure that you have the proper mob count, that you didn't miss 1 mob somewhere. And if you did, you are going to have to kill either the alligator or the tentacle, but either by opening the menu or by looking at your multipliers, as soon as that multiplier hits ×4, we know we have hit our mob count. So we just mow this tentacle down, and as soon as he dies, we get the 4x multiplier. So we are going to skip the rest, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to taunt these guys. Unfortunately, that alligator did go through the motions of chasing after somebody before I got the taunt off, but as soon as he finishes that animation, he will come back at me. So I'm making sure I got all the aggro, making sure that the DPS and healer are making it through just fine, safe and dandy, and no problem. So as long as you do that with a good method, it's not going to be a problem. Let the tank go in first to get the aggro, and the DPS can sneak through pretty much incident free. They can grab. And I was sleeping on the job here. I didn't get in and aggro this boss right away. I think my taunts might have been on cooldown, not sure, but regardless, you know, I was sleeping on the job. Didn't get onto the boss. And get his aggro right away like I should have. So he went chasing after someone else. But for me, this boss is super basic. But I am, you know, pretty well versed with this boss. So you might not be able to take the same approach that I do. But for me, I prefer to just pull out my hatchet away. You know, taunt him, do damage to him. But when I'm just constantly doing damage, I'm going to always have his aggro. He does still have attacks he's going to do to other people, no matter how much you have his aggro. But his main attacks, he's going to send your way. And boss is immune right now, but I'm just throwing some hatches at it just for fun. But anytime this boss goes down on their knees and screams, you want to pretty much run away from them, because they're going to go middle and they're going to be immune. So you can definitely sneak a little bit of extra DPS out of them when they go down on their knees. But if you don't know the right time to run away, just run away right away, because otherwise you can get sucked in and you can get knocked pretty easily. So for the most part, we're just trying to DPS and we're trying to dodge a majority of his mechanics. You can see he's still going to hit us with a few of them, and it's not the end of the world. We have a really strong healer, but chances are, you know, especially if you're getting started, you might not be able to take this approach. You might have to be a lot more passive. You might have to sit back and taunt him, then block with your sword and shield, and just do little hits of DPS. But you can see I'm just DPSing him the whole time. So ideally you get to the point where you can pull out your hatchet and just DPS him the whole time. It's going to help your team because you're going to help melt him faster. And anytime you can shed some time off of the run, it is a bonus. You know, with the M10 gold runs, you are up against the clock. And we do easily smash it. So, you know, if I wanted to be more passive, I could have afforded to, but the faster you finish it, the bigger time bonus you're going to get. So I am, for the most part, trying to stay on a different side of the boss than my DPS. We do have some good DPS that, you know how to dodge and all that good stuff, so sometimes it does get a little bit carried away, but trying to be as predictable as I can and staying on one side. So once the DPS see, okay, that's the side the tank's on, I'm going to move to the other side. But I am obviously dodging back and forth a little bit, so moving right and left. And you can see our DPS, they did still get taken out even though they're on the opposite side of me. That's because the boss, he's going to do attacks on you as a DPS or a healer no matter what. Whether he throws his electric rod at you, whether it's one of those tornadoes that come and get you. So you gotta be looking out. And he's got like a couple of butts he does with his spear. His main attacks he's gonna be doing to you as the tank, but he does have a few moves that he's gonna always do to the DPS. So I guess you could say we got a little bit careless there. All the DPS and the tank were all stacked up on the same side as him, but kind of established where I was, and I should have gone a little bit towards the inside. The problem was that we had that lightning ring that was keeping me from going on the very opposite side. But I still could have done better by being on the inside and allowing the DPS to be on the complete opposite side of me. So those lightning rings, they do tend to cause some problems. They affect where you can stand and where you can't stand. But that is that. And of course we got this silly bug that's still in the game. Kind of crazy it's still in it. That when it ends, everybody starts getting knocked. We can see 69k points. We had 2 respawns, so we could have improved the run. Could have been like a 75k run without those 2 respawns, but nonetheless, very, very easily smashed. So I guess that's going to be it for the run. I hope you liked it. Any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments.